It was just past midnight when Mark finally fell into a deep, exhausted sleep. The kind of sleep that feels like it could last forever, pulling him away from the worries and stress of the day. His small apartment was silent, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the only sound accompanying the occasional flicker of a streetlight outside. Everything seemed perfectly ordinary, but ordinary was about to change forever. A sudden frantic barking shattered the night. His dog, Rusty, a medium-sized mutt with fur the color of toasted almonds, was barking relentlessly, yipping and growling at the bedroom door. At first Mark groaned, rolling over, irritated. "Rusty, not now. It's late," he muttered, thinking it was just a bad dream the dog had, or maybe a neighborhood cat prowling outside. But Rusty's barking grew louder, more insistent. The dog pawed at Mark's shoulder, tugging at his shirt with a strength that startled him awake. Mark blinked, disoriented. That's when he smelled it. Smoke! A thick, acrid smell that made his eyes water. Panic surged through him as he realized the source, his kitchen. Flames were already licking the cabinets, hungrily devouring everything in their path. His heart froze for a split second. The fire was spreading fast. He had only seconds to react. Rusty's eyes locked onto Mark's with an intensity that sent shivers down his spine. He tugged again at the shirt, almost as if saying, "Move, now!" Adrenaline surged through Mark. Forgetting all rational thought, he stumbled to his feet, coughing as smoke filled the room. Rusty led him through the haze, guiding him toward the front door. Every second counted. Behind them, the ceiling groaned ominously, wooden beams threatening to collapse. Finally, they burst into the night air. Mark's lungs burned, his hair and clothes smeared with soot, but he was alive. Rusty limped slightly, his fur singed in patches, but his tail wagged weakly. He had done it. He had saved Mark. Neighbors, alerted by the smoke and the frantic barking, rushed to help as the fire consumed what was left of the apartment. Mark clutched Rusty to his chest, tears streaming down his face, a mixture of relief, fear, and gratitude. In that moment, Mark realized something profound. This little creature, this loyal companion, had risked everything without hesitation. The dog who had once just wagged his tail at the door now had a permanent place in Mark's heart, not just as a pet but as a hero. The night had been terrifying, the fire merciless. But one thing was undeniable. Rusty's courage had turned a potential tragedy into a story of survival, of devotion, and of unwavering love. And as they sat on the sidewalk, watching the firefighters battle the flames, Mark whispered softly, "You saved me, buddy. You really did." Rusty leaned into him, panting, exhausted but proud. The morning after the fire, the city smelled of smoke and ash, and Mark woke with a heavy ache in his chest. Sleep had eluded him. Images of flames dancing across the ceiling and Rusty's desperate barking haunted him like a relentless shadow. He looked over to the small corner where Rusty usually slept, expecting the dog to be curled up and exhausted. But he was already awake, his eyes alert, scanning the room as if guarding against invisible threats. Mark's apartment was gone. Charred wood, melted plastic, and the lingering stench of burnt meals were all that remained of what had once been his sanctuary. But among the ruins, one thing was clear. Rusty was alive, and that alone was a miracle. Guilt twisted in Mark's chest. If it hadn't been for him, I wouldn't have made it. And he almost got hurt. He knelt beside Rusty, inspecting him for injuries. There were small burns along the edges of his ears and paws, his fur matted with soot. But the dog wagged his tail weakly, nuzzling Mark's hand as if to say, "It was worth it. You're safe." Mark knew he couldn't stay in the apartment. The fire department had deemed it unsafe, and he had lost nearly everything. With Rusty in tow, he wandered the streets, uncertain where to go. Neighbors offered blankets, water, and concerned looks. Some even offered temporary shelter, but Mark's mind was elsewhere. Every siren, every crackle of wood in the nearby alleyways made him flinch. The fire had burned more than furniture and walls. It had burned a sense of security, leaving him fragile and vulnerable. At the small shelter he eventually found, Mark realized something remarkable. Rusty wasn't just a pet. He was a guardian, a reminder that even in the darkest hours, loyalty and courage could shine brighter than fear. The staff at the shelter marveled at the dog's injuries and the story of how he had saved Mark. Rusty, despite his burns, received gentle care, bandages, and treats, his tail wagging at every smile and kind word. Mark sat beside him, holding his paw, tears welling up. "I owe you my life, all of it." As the days passed, Mark's bond with Rusty deepened. He learned to notice every subtle signal, the way Rusty tilted his head when danger approached, the way he whimpered when someone he didn't trust came near. Rusty had become more than a pet. He was a constant presence, a protector, and a teacher. He had shown Mark what true devotion meant, not just through heroics, but in silent, watchful vigilance that demanded nothing in return. The experience changed Mark. He began to see the world differently, appreciating small moments he had once overlooked, the warmth of sunlight on his face, the quiet loyalty of a companion lying at his feet, the beauty in simple survival. The fire had taken much, but it had also revealed what truly mattered: courage, love, and the unbreakable bond between a man and his dog. Mark never forgot that night, and every time he looked at Rusty, now patched and healing, he remembered that heroism could come in the smallest forms. The quick decision of a dog who refused to let his human sleep through danger. Rusty had taught him to live with gratitude, vigilance, and heart wide open, ready for whatever life dared to throw their way next. The days after the fire blurred together, Mark stayed in a small, temporary apartment provided by a kind neighbor, but every time he closed his eyes, he could see the flames, hear Rusty's frantic barking, and feel the heat of the collapsing ceiling. It was a constant reminder of how close he had come to death. But Rusty was slowly recovering. The burns on his paws and ears were healing, though the fur had fallen in patches, leaving pink scars that made Mark's heart ache every time he looked at them. Every morning, Mark would carefully clean Rusty's wounds, apply ointment, and watch as the brave dog endured it all without complaint. There were nights when Rusty whimpered softly, haunted by the memory of the fire, pulling Mark close for comfort. And Mark would hold him, whispering apologies, telling him he was the bravest dog he had ever known. "You saved me, Rusty, and now it's my turn to take care of you," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. Outside, the world seemed impossibly harsh. Friends and co-workers offered their support, but Mark felt disconnected. The fire had burned away more than possessions. It had left him raw, sensitive, and painfully aware of life's fragility. Yet each day he found solace in Rusty's presence. The dog's resilience inspired him, reminded him that survival was not just about escaping death. It was about living fully afterward, with courage and gratitude. One afternoon, as Mark walked Rusty through the park, a small child ran up, pointing at the dog. "Your dog's hurt," she exclaimed, noticing the scars along his ears. Mark knelt, smiling through a lump in his throat. "He's a hero," he said quietly, brushing the girl's hair aside. "He saved my life, and now we take care of him together." Rusty wagged his tail as if proud to be recognized, his eyes shining with the quiet dignity only animals can possess. Slowly, Mark began to rebuild. He found a new apartment, smaller but warm, and started saving money to replace the items lost in the fire. But more importantly, he started to rebuild himself. Rusty was more than a companion now. He was a mirror of courage, showing Mark how to face life's challenges with unwavering determination. Every morning, when Rusty bounded out of bed, ready to face the world, Mark felt a surge of hope. He wasn't alone, not anymore. As the weeks passed, the bond between man and dog deepened into something unbreakable. Rusty no longer just guided Mark from danger, he guided him through life. And Mark, in turn, became more attentive, more loving, more protective of the little creature who had risked everything for him. The fire had left scars, yes, but it had also forged a bond stronger than fear, stronger than pain, and stronger than any loss. Mark often thought about that night, the heat, the smoke, the terror, and how a small, loyal dog had turned it all around. Rusty's bravery had given him a second chance, not just to live, but to cherish life in its rawest, most beautiful form. And every time Rusty nudged him awake in the middle of the night, Mark smiled through the exhaustion. Knowing that the dog wasn't just protecting him from danger, He was teaching him the true meaning of love, sacrifice, and survival. Weeks had passed since the fire, yet Mark still carried the shadow of that night with him. Every creak of the floorboards, every faint smell of smoke, sent a shiver down his spine. But Rusty, now mostly healed, had become more than a companion. He was a constant reminder of survival, courage, and loyalty. The little dog, once playful and carefree, now moved with a quiet dignity, as if he knew he had already faced death and had won. Mark had started returning to his routines, slowly reintegrating into work and social life. But he'd noticed a change in himself. Ordinary life seemed different. Everything that once seemed trivial now carried weight. The warmth of the sun, the laughter of strangers, even a simple cup of coffee felt like a gift. And at the center of this awakening was Rusty, the small creature who had risked everything for him. One evening, as Mark sat on the balcony of his new apartment, Rusty at his feet, he reflected on the fire and the aftermath. "I don't know how I can ever repay you," he whispered, his hand resting gently on Rusty's head. The dog looked up, eyes gleaming with understanding, as if to say, "You already are." But it wasn't just about gratitude. Mark realized that Rusty's bravery had given him a responsibility to live fully, to honor the life he had been given, and to protect the one who had saved him. He began volunteering at a local animal shelter, teaching kids about the bond between humans and animals, sharing Rusty's story as a lesson in courage and loyalty. The little dog became an ambassador of hope, inspiring others to care for and respect the creatures who often go unnoticed, yet risk everything without hesitation. Yet, the trauma lingered. There were nights when Mark woke sweating, reliving the fire in vivid detail. Rusty would nuzzle him awake, sensing the fear, calming him with warmth and presence. It was in these quiet, intimate moments that Mark understood the depth of their connection. Rusty had not only saved his life physically, but emotionally, guiding him through fear, pain, and uncertainty with steadfast devotion. One rainy afternoon, Mark took Rusty for a walk through the neighborhood that had watched their story unfold. Neighbors waved, some offering treats and kind words. Children pointed and whispered about the hero dog, and Mark felt a swelling pride mixed with humility. Rusty's scars were visible now, little marks of courage etched into his fur, but they were badges of honor in the eyes of everyone who knew the story. As they returned home, soaked but smiling, Mark realized something profound. Life was fragile, unpredictable, and sometimes terrifying. But it was also full of miracles, moments where love, loyalty, and courage intersected in the most unexpected ways. Rusty had been his miracle, his anchor in the storm, his silent teacher. And Mark vowed from that day forward to live with a heart as brave, as loyal, and as unwavering as the dog who had risked everything to save him. Life was slowly finding its rhythm again, but Mark knew it would never be the same. The fire had taken so much, yet it had given him something far greater: perspective. He had always thought of himself as independent, capable, in control. But that night, he had realized how fragile life truly was, and how much he depended on Rusty, the small, brave soul who had faced flames without hesitation. Rusty had recovered almost completely, his burns now just faint pink scars that told the story of that terrifying night. Yet those scars were more than marks of survival. They were symbols of courage, resilience, and devotion. Every time Mark looked at Rusty, he saw a silent hero who had risked pain and danger without a second thought, all for the love of another being. It humbled him, taught him lessons no human teacher ever could. Mark began to notice subtle changes in himself. He laughed more easily, hugged more freely, and cherished moments he would have once ignored. A walk in the park became a celebration, a shared meal, a ritual of gratitude. Rusty, ever vigilant, seemed to sense the shift in his human, responding with affection and quiet pride. Together they were healing, body and soul intertwined. One rainy afternoon, as they sat by the window watching the city shimmer under the downpour, Mark reflected on how much he had taken life for granted. He thought about neighbors, friends, and colleagues, and realized how rare it was to encounter loyalty like Rusty's. Not just loyalty, but courage, the kind that forces you to act when every instinct screams to run. Rusty had acted, without hesitation, without fear, and in doing so, he had given Mark not just life, but purpose. That night, as Mark settled into bed with Rusty curled beside him, he whispered into the quiet room, "You saved me, buddy, not just from the fire, but from everything I didn't even know I needed saving from." Rusty lifted his head, nuzzled Mark's hand, and rested it back on his chest. No words were needed. The bond was unspoken, unshakable, and eternal. Mark began sharing Rusty's story with others, not for fame or attention, but to honor the life of the little dog who had risked everything. Local schools invited him to speak about the bond between humans and animals. Neighbors often stopped to pet Rusty and hear the tale. Children would look wide-eyed at the scars and ask questions about bravery, loyalty, and love. Mark would tell them gently, heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they just wag their tails. And in these moments, Mark felt a profound shift. The fire had taken his home, belongings, and sense of security, but it had gifted him a truth he would never forget. Life was fragile. Love was powerful, and courage often came in the smallest, most unexpected forms. Rusty, the dog who had smelled the fire, who had risked everything to save him, had transformed Mark's life forever. He was more than a pet. He was a teacher, a guardian, and a hero in silence, showing that sometimes salvation comes from the heart of a friend with 4 legs and unwavering loyalty. The years passed, but the memory of that night never faded. Mark often reflected on how fragile life could be, how quickly everything familiar could vanish in smoke and flames. And yet, he also remembered the bravery that had saved him, the small, loyal creature who had faced danger without fear, Rusty. The little dog had been more than a pet. He had been a lifeline, a teacher, and a companion who showed Mark what courage and love truly meant. Rusty had grown older now. His muzzle had streaks of gray, and his steps were slower, but his eyes retained the same spark, the same unwavering loyalty that had saved Mark so many years ago. Every scar, every patch of fur lost and regrown told a story of survival and devotion. And every day, Mark was reminded that the bond they shared was unbreakable, forged in fire and solidified through trials that neither would ever forget. Mark often took Rusty to the park, where children would gather to hear their story. They listened in awe as he described the night the dog had saved his life, the frantic barking that had pulled him from certain death, and the bravery that no one could teach, only live. Sometimes heroes come in unexpected forms, Mark would say, smiling as Rusty wagged his tail. Sometimes they just have 4 legs and a heart bigger than the world. Life had changed profoundly. Mark had rebuilt his home, his work, and even himself, but the lessons of that night remained embedded in his soul. He no longer feared loss or danger the way he once had, for he had witnessed firsthand what true courage looked like. And through it all, Rusty had been by his side, not just surviving, but teaching him how to live fully with gratitude, love, and unshakable faith in loyalty. One quiet evening, Mark sat on the porch, Rusty nestled in his lap. The sun was setting, casting warm gold across the sky. He stroked Rusty's fur and whispered softly, "You saved my life, buddy. And in return, I've spent every day trying to make yours as full of love and happiness as possible." Rusty rested his head against Mark's chest, letting out a soft, contented sigh. It was a simple moment, yet it held the weight of everything they had endured together: the fire, the fear, the pain, and ultimately the triumph of survival and love. Mark realized that their bond was eternal, forged in the crucible of that terrifying night, and strengthened by every shared moment since. Rusty was more than a dog. He was a symbol of courage, a living testament to the power of loyalty, and the reason Mark could face each day with hope and gratitude. The fire had changed them forever, but it had also revealed the beauty of unwavering devotion. As darkness fell, Mark whispered once more, "Forever, Rusty. Forever." The dog's tail thumped softly against the porch, a heartbeat in rhythm with Mark's own. In that quiet night, man and dog sat together, bound not just by survival, but by a love that would never fade, a story of bravery, and the unspoken truth that sometimes the greatest heroes come with 4 legs and a heart bigger than fear itself.